Dark bark, rendered fat, and tender brisket on a pellet grill? Yeah, it's possible, and I'm gonna show you exactly how you can pull it off at home. So very standard brisket trim here, nothing special. Start on the fat cap, trim off the brown parts of the brisket, cut down the fat cap to about 1/4 of an inch, and then round out the brisket. Go to the lean side and then cut out the decal fat, and it's good to go. Now for seasoning, I'm doing Derby style with pepper, salt, and then Lowry's. So there are a lot of factors that go into what makes a brisket really good when it's finished. But you can break down these factors into two groups, internal factors and external factors. The internal factors are basically that the meat isn't under or overcooked, the fat is rendered on the inside, and also the collagen has completely broken down. The external factors are that the fat cap is nice, rendered and sticky, and the bark is dark, nearly black. In an offset, because it cooks with convection, if you're running your fire correctly, the external factors of the brisket should be done before the internal factors, at least most of the time. And that's because the movement of hot smoke over the meat dries it out super quickly. And this jumpstarts the Maillard reaction, which is the browning process or the bark formation process in terms of our brisket. As a result, the bark on an offset brisket will look absolutely fantastic like 4 hours into the cook. And at that point, the internal temperature is like around 150 degrees, not even close to being done. But that is not the case with a pellet grill. Although there is some convection going on inside of the pellet grill as evidenced by the smoke coming out of the small chimney, there are other cooking processes that are occurring within the pellet grill, like the radiant heat that's coming off of the fire pot that's right under the cooking grates. Because of this, pellet grill briskets usually finish cooking really fast, even though the fat on the top hasn't completely rendered, nor has the bark completely set yet, resulting in either an overcooked brisket that just completely falls apart when you try to slice it, or a brisket with terrible bark. But I'm gonna show you some tricks to boost the external factors of the brisket so that by the end of the cook, we will have a perfectly cooked brisket from the inside to the out. And the first trick I'm gonna do is dry brine this brisket. And this will basically dry out the surface of our brisket, which will give us a head start on that Maillard reaction, which will give us a great bark at the end. And that's because the Maillard reaction does not begin until the surface of the meat is dry. So I'm gonna stick this brisket in my chilled Yeti for about 8 to 10 hours. All right, guys, I highly advise that you pause the video right now, run and get yourself a notepad and a pen because this pet setup is gonna be pretty extensive. Also, just FYI, I'm using my Camp Chef Woodwind Pellet Grill to cook this brisket. So the first thing I wanna cover is temperature. So I have set my pit to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And I would say go between 185 degrees Fahrenheit to 210 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on how big your brisket is. Secondly, make sure you get a good quality pellet because the pellet is where we get the smoke flavor into our brisket, so do not cheap out here. I'm using a blend from Camp Chef and I've never used their pellets before, but I have heard good things about them, so we'll see how they do today. Also, if you use crappy pellets, you're gonna get temperature swings during your cook and you could get ash buildup, which could turn out to be a burnout in your pellet grill. Now for the third tip. So as you can see, we are cooking this brisket on the upper grate. So like I said before, there is a lot of radiant heat coming off of that fire pot right under the grates. So basically we're just maxing out the distance between the brisket to that fire pot. In my previous experience, I have put a brisket on the bottom grate, and the thing that I noticed is that the brisket tends to get puffed up, just like when you do a hot and fast brisket. So if the brisket starts puffing up like that, you know that it's gonna be done really fast and the bark is not gonna be at that super dark offset quality. And that's why I think it's super important if you want a really dark bark to make sure that you put your brisket on that top rack. Now, if you're forced to use both racks or you simply don't have an upper rack, I would say just go super low in the cook. I'm talking like around the 180s, just to keep the fire pot as cool as possible while you're cooking the briskets. But another alternative is you can just go on Amazon and pay like 20 or 30 bucks for a foldable upper rack. So if you're interested in that option, I will have a link in the description for an upper grate. Now let's go to the bottom grate. So as you can see, I have a foil pan and some fire bricks. So the foil pan is just there to hold the fire bricks, and I'm hoping that the fire bricks will absorb the heat from that fire pot and then disperse it over the surface area of the bricks. And I actually got this idea from Raleigh Smoke, but alternatively, you could use either water or sand as a heat sink. But with the fans and the air circulation inside of the pellet grill, I just wouldn't want to get sand on my brisket. And in terms of water, like I said before, I want this brisket to be bone dry. I'm talking SpongeBob and Sandy Cheeks house dry. dry. So I want absolutely no water in the cooking environment. Now, alternatively, I could have used the fat trimmings that I got from the brisket, put that in a foil pan, and then use that to deflect the heat. But I'd already bought the fire bricks when I realized this, so I'm using the fire bricks. Finally, I have 2 chunks of wood on both sides of the brisket to basically tilt the brisket so that any liquid that would have pooled on top of the brisket, ruining my bark, would just fall off. And this is important because, as you can see, I am cooking this brisket fat side up. But anyway, shout out to Harry Sue for the wood chunk tipping brisket trick, because I learned that tip from his YouTube channel a long time ago when I only had my Weber Smoky Mountain. Alternatively, you can tip your briskets when it starts to pool, like every 30 minutes or so. But the first problem with that is that a pellet grill works on an auger system that's pushing out pellets based on the temperature readings. So if you open the door too often, you're gonna cause temperature swings during your cook. And the second reason, and definitely more important, is I'm about to go to bed right now, so I'm not gonna be around to tip the brisket. So I'm also leaving one of my Camp Chef probes inside of the brisket so that just in case anything goes wrong during the cook, the app will alert me and I can get out of bed and fix it. And this is where the pellet grill shines, man. Just set your barbecue and chill. You could literally have barbecue every single day if you wanted. So cool. But anyways, I'm tired, so I'll see you guys in the morning. Good morning. So it's been right about 9 hours since I put this brisket on, and it is just about entering the stall. So let's go ahead and see how the brisket is doing so far. All right, look at that. Getting a nice crust on it. Okay, so at this point, as you can see, the bark is looking pretty nice. It's getting a little too dark on the edges in comparison to the center of the brisket. So I'm gonna start spritzing the sides of the brisket, but I'm also gonna hike up the temperature so that we can get this brisket out of the stall, and then we can wrap it if we need to. All right, and notice how I'm just spraying the edges of the brisket. Again, we want the bark to set. So if I start spraying this part, we're basically gonna wash off the bark. It's gonna take this whole thing just way longer to cook, and we're working with a small brisket here. So, you know, it's gonna be really easy to dry out this brisket if we mess around too much. So again, just spraying the sides. All right, so it's been about 2 hours since we hiked up the temperature to 250 degrees, and we know that the brisket is ready to wrap. And the reason why we know that is because, first of all, the bark is looking really good right now, a nice dark color. And second of all, when we put our finger on that fat cap, we can see that the fat is just giving way. It's nice and squishy, so we know that the fat is rendered. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this brisket, and I'm gonna be using butcher paper today, and I'm also going to be adding in some Wagyu beef tallow inside of the wrap. So this Wagyu beef tallow has been sitting in my fridge for like 3 or 4 months now. Basically, I used it in a skit that I did for one of my intros. So if you guys are interested, you can check out that video, and I'll have that linked in the description if you haven't seen it. But another added benefit is that Wagyu beef tallow is a very high quality fat, so it won't hurt putting it on our brisket. And the whole point of the tallow is just to soften up the bark on the outside. Again, we went pretty far into the cook unwrapped, so parts of the brisket are kind of crispy, so that beef tallow is kind of acting as lotion for the ashy parts of the brisket. Then I'm gonna put the wrap brisket back on the cooker and then raise the temperature to 300 degrees Fahrenheit until the brisket is done. And I'll know it's done once I pick up the brisket right in the center and I feel to see if the collagen has broken down. And I know that it is if it feels jiggly in my hand. Then I'll rest it, and then we can see how it turned out. All right, so before I cut into this brisket, I need to say that this is my first time cooking on a pellet grill in a really long time, and there is definitely a learning curve to getting back into it. So previously, after I wrapped up the brisket, I said that I put the pellet grill to 300 degrees. Well, 30 minutes into that, I realized that there was just so much radiant heat emanating off of the fire pot that I had to bring down the temperature. So I dropped it down to about 260. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and cut into this, and I'm gonna start out with our brisket junior. So off camera, I ended up pulling off the brisket junior and put some of that Wagyu beef tallow on it, put it in some butcher paper, and it's been resting in the oven. Another thing about the brisket junior is today I was watching my daughter, so I didn't have a lot of time to eat lunch, so I actually cut off pieces of the brisket junior and ate it. So forgive me for that. But yeah, let's go ahead and cut this thing open, see how it is. Flat end cap, never gets old. Beautiful brisket junior. So brisket junior was shredding apart quite a bit, and it's because I burned it, but it's not terribly bad. Still looks really good. It's just really falling apart, but still gonna be delicious. Let me try it actually. Still really tasty, but a little bit too much salt for my taste if I'm being honest. All right, on to the main event. Let's see how this thing turned out. Oh man, this thing is so cute. Absolutely adorable. Beautiful bark. All right, let's go ahead and cut this thing. Really pleased with the fat render on the top of this brisket. Definitely overcooked it, but not a bad brisket. All right, let me go ahead and try one of these burnt ends. All right. That's good. The bark is a tad bit too crispy for my taste, but great smoke flavor. The fat on this brisket tastes so good. It reminds me so much of an offset brisket. But again, not perfect by any means. And I'm looking forward to just continuing to try different things and trying to refine my technique on the pellet grill. So a big thank you to Camp Chef for sending me this pellet grill because I have been wanting one for so long. And if you guys want to know more about the Camp Chef Woodwind that I used during this cook, then you can watch the next video on your screen where I did a review of it.